All the Young Dudes, James' Perspective by Stay in Dreams. Chapter 1. Summer 1971. The late August air was biting, but James Potter didn't mind. To him, the sharp whistle of the wind against his ears was the sound of progress. He was currently several dozen feet above the manicured lawns of the Potter estate, leaning low over the handle of his broom, feeling every bit like the professional chaser he was destined to become. "James, get back in here before she catches you!" Peter Pettigrew's frantic whisper cut through the rush of the wind. James banged sharply, his cloak snapping behind him like a banner, and brought himself level with his second-story bedroom window. Peter was huddled there, his face pale and eyes wide with a familiar twitchy sort of dread. He was staring down at the patio, as if expecting Euphemia Potter to materialize out of thin air and begin handing out life sentences. "Don't worry, Pete," James called back with a grin. "She doesn't mind me practicing." Technically, that was half-truth. Euphemia encouraged his passion, but she also had an almost supernatural ability to detect the exact moment a chill moved from refreshing to pneumonia-inducing. To his mother, this gusty afternoon was a one-way ticket to a hospital wing. But James relished it. He figured if he could master a sloth grip roll in a British gale, a sunny match at Hogwarts would be a walk in the park. "Still," Peter whined, his voice reaching that high-pitched frequency that usually preceded a pauper panic. "You should come back in. My parents will be here soon." James fought the urge to roll his eyes. He loved Peter. Pete was the best audience the blog could ask for. But his lack of vertical ambition was baffling. James had spent all morning trying to coax him onto a spare broom, but Peter treated gravity like a personal enemy. "First years never get to join the team anyway," Peter had grumbled earlier, as if that were a law of physics rather than a mere suggestion. James, however, lived by a different set of rules. Ever since his dad had taken him to his first professional match at age 7, James hadn't just wanted to fly, he needed to. He could still remember the blur of the beaters and the leather grace of the chasers. It was magic within magic, the kind of spectacle that made everything else seem dull and grey. He'd decided then and there that he'd be the one the crowd roared for. And why shouldn't he? In his 11 years of life, James had never met a hurdle he couldn't jump or a person he couldn't charm. He was a Potter. Winning was what they did. "All right," James called out, a mischievous glint dancing in his brown eyes. He shifted his grip, the wood of the broom feeling like an extension of his own arms. "But get your ass out of the way." "Oh, no, you don't." Whatever protest Peter was attempting was swallowed by the wind. James didn't just fly toward the window, he aimed for it like a sneak cub spotting the snitch. He put on a burst of speed, the stone walls of the manor blurring as he charged. Peter let out a strangled yelp and scrambled backward, diving for the safety of the rock just as James shot through the flame. In his head, it was going to be a masterpiece, a high-speed 360-degree spin that ended with him standing upright on the floorboards, broom in hand. In reality, the bedroom was significantly smaller than the open sky. James managed about half of the spin before the wardrobe loomed dangerously close. He jerked the handle, lost his balance, and went sprawling. He hit the floor with an ungraceful thud, the broom clattering beside him. "You knucklehead," Peter scolded him, looking down at him with a pursed expression that made him resemble a rather irritated mouse. James just laughed, sitting up on the rock and ruffling his hair, which was already such a disaster area that the gesture was purely redundant. He didn't mind being called a knucklehead, not when he nearly pulled off something spectacular. "I'll show you what it was meant to look like at Hogwarts," he promised, his eyes dancing behind. In James's mind, the school was less of an institution and more of a stage where he was about to debut. He sprang to his feet with a sort of boundless energy that usually resulted in something breaking, and scooped up his broom. Once I am on the Gryffindor Quidditch team, we can use the pitch whenever we want. And what makes you think we will be in Gryffindor? Peter asked, hopping onto James's bed and swinging his legs. The question made James bark out a laugh, though there wasn't a speck of malice in it. He'd known Peter since they were nappies, and he was well versed in the subtle art of pettigrew anxiety. James had an almost gravity-defying ability to shrug off doubt, but he knew Peter was made of softer stuff. To James, life was a series of open doors. To Peter, most of those doors seemed likely to slam on his fingers. Of course I'll be in Gryffindor, James said, with the kind of certainty usually reserved for the sunrise. He walked across the room to the mahogany rack, hanging his broom back in its place. He handled the wood with a reverent tenderness. The only time James Potter was ever truly careful was when he was dealing with flying equipment. Where else would I be? He turned around and cleared his throat with a theatrical flourish, striking a pose he'd seen his father adopt when he was feeling particularly posh. James puffed out his narrow chest and looked down his nose at an imaginary crowd. Gryffindor favors those of a brave heart, courage, determination, and chivalry, the nobles of all houses. He finished the speech by flashing a lopsided grin at his friend. It worked. Peter's nervous face fractured as he collapsed onto the duvet in a fit of giggles. James looked for that, the feeling of being the one who could make the room go bright again. That's me, see, James declared, giving his chest a confident thump. There's no way I'm ending up anywhere else. Yeah, you're probably right, Peter admitted, though his voice lacked the steel of James' conviction. I just wish I could be as confident about it. James squinted at him, his internal Peter alarm going off. The smaller boy had developed that pinched frown between his eyebrows that meant a worry was currently brewing into his brain. James hated it when things got heavy or somber. It felt wrong in a room filled with Quidditch posters and sunlight. Without a second's hesitation, James took a running leap and landed on the mattress beside him. He misjudged the distance slightly, his head thumping into Peter's ribs with a dull whack. "Oi!" Peter yelped, the yell leaving him in a wheeze. "Come on, Pete," James said, rolling onto his back and staring up at the ceiling, feeling the springy give of the bed beneath them. "Tell me what's bothering you." "Nothing." "Liar, liar, pants on fire," James cried. He didn't wait for a confession. He launched into a tactical tickle attack with the precision of a seeker. Peter let out a strangled shriek, scrimping and kicking so wildly that the stray foot nearly caught James right in the jaw. Okay, I yield," Peter squealed, his face turning a blotchy red as he gasped for air through his laughter. James chuckled, finally relenting and flopping down onto the duvet beside him. His hair, already a lost cause, now looked like it had survived a small explosion. While he usually preferred being the loudest person in the room, James had a surprising capacity for quiet when his mates actually needed him. He could tell Peter wasn't just being Pete today. The worry was deeper. "It's just," Peter began hesitantly, picking at a loose thread on the bedspread. "I don't want to disappoint my parents. I still remember the look on their faces when Philly got sorted into Hufflepuff. All their friends' kids are in Gryffindor. You too, soon." James turned his head to meet Peter's gaze, his expression softening. He found it hard to imagine a world where he could ever truly disappoint his parents. Effie and Monty tended to treat his every sneeze like a magical breakthrough, but he felt a protective surge for his friend. He rolled onto his stomach, propping himself on his elbows to pat Peter's shoulder with a reassuring hand. "Don't worry about it, Pete," he said, his voice ringing with that Potter brand confidence. "I know we'll both end up in Gryffindor, and when we do, we'll be doormates and have the time of our lives at Hogwarts." "Really?" Peter asked. The hope in his voice was so fragile made James want to go and find the Sorting Hat right then, just to give it a piece of his mind. "Have I ever been wrong?" James replied, his grin widening until it was practically a challenge. "Actually, you're not supposed to answer that, you prat," James laughed. He didn't wait for a comeback. He grabbed a stray pillow and thwacked Peter over the head with it. For a few seconds the room was a whirlwind of flying feathers and muffled shouts as a full-scale pillow war broke out. The chaos was only interrupted when the bedroom door creaked open. Philemon Potter stood in the doorway, a booming laugh starting deep in his chest, a sound that made James feel like everything in the world was exactly where it should be. "Thought I heard you boys up here," his dad said, his eyes twinkling behind his spectacles. "Effie's waiting for us downstairs. Peter, your parents should be here He was cut short by the unmistakable crack of someone's apparating in the entrance hall below. "There they are," Philemon finished with a wink. James didn't need to be told twice. He and Peter leaped to their feet, abandoning the pillows and racing each other for the door. They had been talking about his trip to Diagon Alley for what felt like a century. To James, it wasn't just a shopping trip. It was the beginning of his real life. By the time they skipped into the entrance hall, James's mom was already there, looking elegant and ready to handle a crowd. She was chatting with Peter's parents, but James barely noticed the adults. He was in such a rush to get out the door that he nearly did a faceplant on the marble floor, his fingers fumbling with his laces as he tried to shove his feet into his shoes. "Wands," he thought, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Today I'm getting my wand." "James Philemon Potter!" James jumped, his head snapping up at his mother's voice rang out, sharp enough to cut through the hum of the entrance hall. He blinked, puzzled by the edge of her tone. Usually the full name treatment was reserved for when he accidentally knocked over an expensive vase or set the curtains on fire. "Where are your glasses?" James slapped a hand to his face, his fingers meeting only skin. "Right." Belatedly, he realized why the world, and Peter in particular, had looked like a collection of beige smudges while they were upstairs. "Sorry, Mom. Must have dropped them when I was flying earlier," he admitted, feeling the sheepish heat rise in his cheeks. "They must have slipped off during that botched 360 turn in his bedroom." Euphemia shook her head, though the corners of her mouth were twitching with an affectionate sort of exasperation. With a flick of a wand and a silent accio, James's wire-rimmed spectacles came zooming down the stairs and landed in her palm. James shuffled over, looking at his boots. "You foolish boy," she murmured. She didn't sound truly cross. She sounded like she was basking in the chaos of having him. She slid the glasses carefully onto his nose, then gave his already disastrous hair a vigorous ruffle. James let out a theatrical groan, mostly to ensure Peter didn't think he was enjoying being mothered. But secretly, he wouldn't have traded that hair ruffle for all the galleons and gringotts. Diagon Alley was a sensory overload in the best possible way. James felt as though he was vibrating at a different frequency. The air didn't just smell like smoke and parchment, it smelled like freedom. He moved through the bustling streets with a glow that felt literal, his eyes starting toward every flickering candle and flipping owl. If Hogwarts was even half as brilliant as this, James was certain he'd never want to come home. He watched his parents with an observant eye as they moved from shop to shop. His mom was the one with the list and the logic, but his dad was a delightfully soft touch. James caught Monty trying to sneak a tin of premium old reeds and a gold-plated cauldron steer into the basket, only for Effie to chuckle and pull him back by the waist, whispering something that made his dad beam. They were brilliant, they really were. But as James watched the other children darting between shops, a restless itch started in his chest. For all the love he received at home, He felt as though he were missing a vital piece of the puzzle. He had Peter, of course, but they'd been a package deal since birth. There was no merit in it. James was itching to find people on his own terms. He wanted to see if his charm was as magnetic as he suspected it was. He wanted to earn a best friend who liked him for the jokes he told, not because their mom were best mates. They hit Flourish and Bots first, where the scent of fresh parchment made James think of the letters he'd soon be writing home. Madame Malkin's was a bit of a trial. Standing still while being pinned was not a potter's strength, but seeing himself in those black robes made the whole thing feel real. The highlight, naturally, was quality Quidditch supplies. James spent a solid 10 minutes of soulful begging in front of the window display. He explained with great gravity how a Nimbus 1001 was practically a safety requirement for a boy of his natural talent. Eventually, his dad caved with a conspiratorial wink, and his mom just sighed with that "I give up" smile. As they walked out with the sleek broom wrapped in brown paper, James felt like he was already halfway to the Gryffindor captaincy. Fleamont had even insisted on a quick detour to the subterranean depths of Gringotts, where James was introduced to his very own private vault. Looking at the piles of gold, James felt a surge of importance. He was a wizard of means now, not just a boy with a weekly allowance. His father had made it quite clear that the ball of the vault was off limits until he came of age, but he still pressed a substantial pile of galleons into James's paw with a conspiratorial wink. "Just don't flaunt it in front of your classmates, or your mother." James had tucked the coins away, his mind already racing with all the brilliant things he could buy to impress his new doormates. The final destination was the one James had been picturing in his head since he was old enough to hold a wooden spoon, and pretended it was a wand. Ollivanders. The Pettigrews had reached it first, and Peter had been ushered inside, while James waited on the cobbles, vibrating with impatience. When Peter emerged, he looked as though he'd just been told he was moving to the Arctic. He was in a proper state, lamenting the fact that his wand's core was unicorn hair, as if it were a mark of ultimate shame. James watched as Peter's mom fussed over him, trying to convince him that unicorns were noble creatures, while his dad just nodded along with the distracted ear of a man thinking about his lunch. James, however, couldn't fathom the dread. Unicorn hair seemed a bit, well, soft, perhaps, but a wand was still a wand. Still, James knew his own was going to be something special, something legendary. He took a steadying breath, adjusted his glasses, and strutted toward the peeling gold letters of the shop with the confidence of a wizard who expected the wall to hand him what he wanted. His parents stayed behind on the pavement, insisting this was a solitary rite of passage. "A young wizard's first wand is personal business," his dad had said, ruffling James's hair, in that way that usually made him feel like a kid, but today felt like a passing of the torch. James suspected they were just looking for an excuse to have a quiet giggle or a quick snog while he was occupied. The bell above the door let out a melodic chime as he stepped inside, and James felt a shiver of adrenaline race down his spine. The shop was a labyrinth of dust and ancient secrets, smelling of age-old wood and something sharp, like ozone after a storm. It was far gloomier than the bright sunlight of the alley, but James didn't mind. It felt important. From behind the towering stacks of narrow boxes, an old man appeared. He had pale, moon-like eyes that seemed to peer right through James's skull, and skin so white it reminded James of the high-quality parchment his father used for ministry correspondence. "Welcome, Mr. Potter. I've been expecting you." Mr. Ollivander said, his voice a whisper. James felt a swell of pride. He loved being recognized. It made him feel as though he were already part of the history of the place. He kept his face steady, trying to channel the dignified wizard. Look his mother always praised, even if his heart was thumping like a frantic snitch. Pleasure to meet you, sir, he replied. He tried for a respectful nod, but it came off as a bit of a cocky bob. He couldn't keep the grin off his face for long, though. He felt like the hero of one of those adventure serials his dad told him about. I'd like to purchase a wand. Determined to show he was a man of the world, he reached into his pocket and produced a handful of the ringgits hold, letting the galleons drop onto the counter with a rhythmic clink. I hope this will suffice, he added, leaning against the desk with a bit more swagger than an 11-year-old needed. Mr. Ollivander let out a chuckle. It will, my dear boy, but the wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter, not the other way round. The old man turned his back, gliding along the shelves as his fingers danced over the boxes, as if they were piano keys. I still remember the day your father, Fleeman, came to purchase his first wand, and your grandfather, Henry, as well. You Potter men have a certain charm about you, I must say. James tried to look interested in the family history, but his patience was wearing thin. He didn't want to hear about what his granddad had done. He wanted to see what he was going to do. His eyes began to roam the shadows of the shop until they snagged on a maroon velvet cause tucked away on a lower shelf. It wasn't just a box. It looked like a treasure. James felt a magnetic tug in his gut, an inexplicable certainty that the case was sitting there just for him. Can I try that one, sir? He asked, cutting right through Mr. Ollivander's reminiscence. The wand-maker stopped mid-sentence, looking a touch bewildered. He hadn't even pulled a measuring tape out yet. Certainly, Mr. Potter, he said, his eyebrow hitching up in surprise as he moved towards the velvet case. He withdrew the wand with a reverence that made James hold his breath. A mahogany wand, 11 inches. James didn't even wait for the full description. He reached out and snatched it from the velvet lining. The moment his skin touched the wood, he didn't need to wave it. He didn't need to blast a vase or make sparks. A brilliant surge of warmth flooded his body, like he just stepped out into a burst of midsummer sunshine after a long winter. It was more than perfect. It felt like his hand had grown an extra 11 inches. Phoenix feather core, Mr. Ollivander finished, a look of satisfaction settling over his pale features. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter, but in this case, it seems your intuition did not fail you. James's grin was so wide it made his cheeks ache. He gave the wand a few experimental swishes, watching the way the light caught the polished mahogany. He felt invincible. Thank you so much, sir, he beamed, feeling as though he might float off the floorboards. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Potter, Mr. Ollivander replied, his knowing eyes following James as he turned to leave. Just as he reached the door, James remembered the gold. Ollivander had mentioned the price was 7 galleons, but James, still riding the high of being the wizard chosen by the Phoenix, swept an extra coin onto the counter, 8 galleons. A bit of a tip for the man who had just handed him his future. He didn't look back to see if it was accepted. He just burst out into the Diagon Alley sun, wand in hand, ready to take on Hogwarts and anything else the world dared to throw at him.